In this video, we're going to talk about the important concept of understanding and embracing variance. So, what is variance and why is it important to you as a poker player? Well, here's the thing. A lot of us have heard of the term variance, but a lot of poker players don't really understand what it is. So, let's specifically define what it is. So, variance, it's the upswings and the downswings in poker. And in other words, this is really the negative and the positive variance in poker. And we'll talk about this more on the upcoming slide. Now, a more definitive definition of variance would be the difference between individual results in the short term and the average set of results we expect to see in the long term based on our correct decision-making process. So, what this is essentially saying is that in the short term, we're not always going to see what we would expect to see in the long term if we were making correct decisions. And you'll see what I'm talking about when we do an example of a coin flip later in this lecture. So why is all of this important to you? Well, if we don't understand what variance is, if we don't embrace it as a poker player, it can greatly negatively influence our poker game. And if it's going to negatively influence our poker game, well, then it's also going to negatively harm our bankroll. And that's mainly because when we're experiencing a downswing, when we're experiencing negative variance, that's often going to lead players to become tilted or to go on tilt. So let's talk about negative versus positive variance. So negative variance is what occurs when we run worse than our long-term expected value of a play. So you have to understand what expected value is or what EV is, and I have a very simple definition here. Expected value is the amount you expect to win or lose on the average when you make a certain poker play. And in poker, we want to make what is called a positive or a plus EV play. That means we're making a profitable play. So if we make a profitable play and statistically we're supposed to win a hand, but we still lose, then we're experiencing negative variance because we're running worse than we actually should. Conversely, if we're running better than we statistically should, then we're experiencing positive variance. And there are actually calculations that you can do. You can do calculations to determine if a play is plus EV or minus EV. And typically what happens is if we have a big hand that we played in and we're not sure if we played it properly, we can analyze that hand after the fact and we can determine if we made a positive expected value play or if we made a negative expected value play that's unprofitable. So when we're talking about negative versus positive variance, you're going to hear some terms. So when it comes to negative variance, it's typically associated with running bad, having a downswing, having what people call our cooler sessions, where they have cold cards and they can't win a hand. Now, when we experience these things, it doesn't always mean that we're experiencing negative variance. Because we could just be playing bad. We could be making these minus expected value plays. So you have to understand that. And then on the flip side, with positive variance, you're typically going to see where somebody's running really good. They're on an upswing. They're on what they would call a heater session, where they're catching all sorts of cards and they're making all sorts of hands and they can't seem to lose a hand. So while these are associated with negative variance, so negative variance for these, and positive variance for this, it doesn't always mean that you're playing well or you're playing bad. Because luck always plays a factor in poker, even though there's skill within poker and skill in the long term is always going to beat out luck. In the short term, luck always plays a factor. So I do have kind of some additional items down here that I do want to talk about before we move on to the next slide. And I want you to understand, this is why we need to understand negative and positive variance and why we need to learn to embrace it, is that negative variance often is going to lead people to play poorly. That's going to cause them to tilt And when we tilt, then we're probably going to spew off chips and give away chips that we shouldn't have been playing with in the first place. Conversely, positive variance can lead to something that I call the invincible syndrome. You're running so well that you think that you can't lose a hand, so you're invincible. And so then you're going to start playing hands that you probably shouldn't play. You're going to take risks that are going to lead to minus expected value plays. So that's going to lead to bad play and potentially spewing off chips that you really shouldn't have played. So I want you to understand that, because just because you're saying I'm running bad or I'm running well, it doesn't really mean that you're playing well or you're playing bad. It could be variance. It might not be variance. And I want you to understand that. And you'll see that as you progress through this course. So let's go ahead and let's talk a bit more about this concept. So we have a total of 5 different slides that I want to talk about. So let's talk about what causes variance. So what in the world causes variance, right? I've spewed off all sorts of different things, like talking about statistical expectations, expected value, and luck, and so forth, and running good and running bad. Well, when it comes to playing poker, when it comes to getting the cards that were dealt and the cards that come on the flop, in the turn, in the river, it all comes down to the randomness of the cards. And it's really nothing more than that. So when we are playing poker, when we're playing for years, sometimes the randomness of the cards are going to be in our favor, and other times they're not. But in the long run, it should all even out, and that's why skill always beats luck in the long run. Because in the short run, anybody can get lucky in a session. If you played poker, if you go to a card room, if you've had a home game, if you play online, you're going to see that there's a new player there, and sometimes they're going to get lucky, and they're going to win a hand that they probably shouldn't have won. So if you're lucky, then cards are going to be dealt with in your favor, right? You've seen people on heater sessions, probably, if you played a fair amount of poker, somebody that's getting aces and kings and queens, or they're making these crazy draws, or they're calling with really bad cards and making these really insane draws and made hands all the time, and they can't seem to lose. Well, that's luck. Yeah, some of it, if they're a good player, some of the time it's going to be skill, but there's also going to be that luck factor involved as well. And then conversely, if we're unlucky, well, then the outcome's probably going to be bad for us, right? We're not going to hit our draws. Our big hands like pocket aces and pocket kings aren't going to hold up, and we may end up losing a lot of hands in the process. So that's what causes variance. Nothing more than the randomness of the cards and really just the luck of the draw. But what you need to understand, and what you'll see on the next slide, is that sample size of hands matter. And I'm going to talk about that on the next slide. I don't want to talk any more about that because I want to make sure that you see what I'm talking about. So how long does variance last? Well, it can vary in length, and we really never know how long it's going to last. And I can give you, from my personal experience playing online, my longest downswing playing online has been a 12,000 hand downswing. And that's really not that much for somebody that plays a very high volume of hands. But to give you a perspective, this happened, I believe, in 2017. And I think it was something like, in terms of my expected EV outcome of the hands, I was something like 15 or 20 buy-ins under my expected outcome in 12,000 hands. It was pretty horrendous. And it took me roughly another 12,000 hands just to get back to break even. So this can last a long time. I've heard of poker players. I've read in poker books, and I've heard from some poker players on different training sites that they've had entire years where they were on a break-even session where they couldn't win. So this can last a very long time. All right, so now let's talk about the coin flip example that's going to illustrate that sample size matters. So the coin flip example is the easiest way to explain the concept of variance. It's a very simple way, and it's going to highlight it very simply. So with a basic coin flip, right, we have a coin, and there's going to be 2 possible outcomes. It's either going to be heads or it's going to be tails. And of course, because there's only 2 possible outcomes, heads or tails, well, then we would expect it to be 50% of heads and 50% of tails, because we can't have any other type of outcome. So if we flipped a coin 100,000 times, well, we'd expect to land on tails 50,000 times, and we'd expect it to land on heads 50,000 times. So 50% on tails and 50% on heads. But does this always happen? No, it doesn't. And if you don't believe me, just go get a coin and start flipping it and start recording the results. And what you're going to find is because of variance is magnified in smaller sample sizes, but as sample sizes get larger, variance tends to dissipate. So it's minimized in larger sample size. So let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at my example here. I use this website to do a coin flip on a website. So this emulates a coin flip, and I use this to put this table together. So let's take a look at the first row. So what you're going to notice is that I did 5 tosses, and we have 3 on heads and 2 on tails. And you're going to say, well, Alton, you can't have that to be even. Well, that's true. So let's actually look at 10. So for a sample size of 10, well, we would expect 5 and 5, but we don't have that. We have 3 times on heads and 7 times on tails. And let me get rid of all my highlighting, and let's just go up to 50 now. So if we have a sample size of 50, we would expect 25 and 25, but we don't. We have 33 on heads and 17 on tails. Now, if we take a look, as we continue to go down this direction, what you're going to notice is that variance is going to start to dissipate. And with this example that I do here, is what you're going to notice is at a sample size of 250, it pretty much starts to dissipate altogether for the most part. Because what you're going to notice is that we have 49% and 51%, 51% and 49%, 50% and 49.5. So this really should be 50.5. I just didn't include that on here. And then we have 49 and 50. So if we continued to do this to 100,000 hands, by the time we reached 100,000 hands, it would be 50% and 49% dot something, and the percentages would probably go out to the thousands or even further. So for all intents and purposes, it would literally be almost 50-50. But what you notice is with these smaller sample sizes up here is that we see all sorts of unexpected results. And when we play poker, so let's take a look at this from the perspective of if you had pocket aces. With pocket aces, if we played it 10 different times, well, the outcome based upon our expected value may be different than what we would expect it to be, so that would be a variance. But if we played pocket aces 2,000 times, then we would expect it to be close to our expected value outcome if we were playing good poker. So that's the biggest takeaway, is understand that in the long run, really, if we're playing well and we're playing proper poker and we're playing in a manner where we're making profitable decisions, variance is going to dissipate and our skill is going to dictate how well that we do. So let's take a look at our last slide. I know this is a long lecture. I apologize, but this is an important topic and I want to make sure you understand it, because I have a lot of students that come back to me and they say, you know, Alton, I've been taking your course for 2 weeks. I haven't won anything, or I've been playing for a month. I played 1,000 hands and I'm down 5 buy-ins. Well, I want you guys to understand the importance of variance and sample size. So remember, poker players that don't understand variance and the upswings and the downswings that are associated with it, they're likely to play poorly and to go on tilt. So some things that you can do, and we're going to talk about dealing with tilt later in this course, but some things you can do if you're experiencing tilt and you're realizing that it's starting to affect your mental game, take a break. Stop playing the session, get up, take a break, and we'll talk a bit more about this when we talk about dealing with tilt. And if you're running good, conversely, don't think that you're invincible. So just don't start playing all these different cards and turning your game into a game of gambling versus a game of good decision making. You don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you still play sound poker. So remember, you need to embrace variance and really don't let variance affect your game. Don't let it dictate how you're supposed to play. If you played a hand properly and you still lost and it was a profitable move, well then so be it. Your opponent got lucky. But in the long run, well, who's going to win in the long run? You're going to win in the long run. So remember, embrace variance because we really don't have any power over variance. We don't have any power over the outcome or the luck of the draw with the cards. So we should just embrace it because we can't control it. And then by embracing variance, hopefully it's going to minimize our tilt as well. And that's really the most important thing here. So remember, do not be result oriented. So when I say result oriented, in the short run, don't look at the outcome of your hands, but look at how you played them and if you played them properly or not. If you played them properly, then in the long run, they're going to be profitable. But in the short term, well, if you lost with pocket aces because your opponent got lucky, well, good for him. But in the long run, if you played against him 2,000 times, then you're going to win a boatload of money against him. So rather than being results oriented, focus on your A game instead. So that's going to conclude our very lengthy lecture on talking about variance in poker and learning to understand what it is, embracing it, and not letting it affect your game. So if you have any questions, let me know. If not, thanks for watching, and I'll see you at the next video.